All right, we are almost to the end of Ben and Me. We are on chapter 14 and 15. This is by Robert Lawson, and this chapter is called Home. The voyage home was made most pleasant for me by the gracious presence of Sophia and her charming children. Ben, however, was quite downcast. He had gone to the palace of Versailles the day after the great battle and had been severely snubbed. The guard, indeed, had been quite rude, making some unpleasant remark about people who shed mice. All his ladies and countesses had also refused to admit him. "But Ben," I said, "don't you realize that our own country of America is waiting to welcome you back as a hero?" "Do you really think so, Amos?" he asked, brightening up. Will we be heroes?" "Of course we will," I said. "Haven't we raised the money for the whole War of Independence? Why, General Washington himself will probably be at the dock to meet us. There'll be bands and parades." Maybe you're right, Amos, he said, all cheered up again. "Do you think there will be fireworks?" Our reception was everything that even Ben could have hoped for. There were salutes of cannon and firearms, there were delegations from Congress, and a message from General Washington. The mayor, the city council, and the 1st Volunteer Fire Brigade were all present, dressed in their best uniforms. There were floats, addresses, bands, and even a parade. Ben, of course, occupied the first carriage, beaming with pride. As usual, he wore the old fur cap, now so ancient and threadbare that there were plenty of peepholes for Sophia and me, and all the 7 children. They naturally were in a state of the greatest excitement, what with the bands and the crowds and their first sight of the new world. Sophia retained her usual well-bred dignity, but her pink eyes sparkled with joy at the prospect of rejoining her husband. He was awaiting our arrival at Ben's house, and my first glance assured me that he was a worthy husband and father for this charming family. I left them to their newfound happiness and accompanied Ben to a great banquet that was being given in his honor by the city council. During the long, wordy speeches, I lay in the cap and thought over the events of the last few years. I had done my duty to General Washington. I had contributed no little to our victory in the war so recently won. The colonies were free. I had redeemed my promise to Sophia, rescued her children, and reunited her family. Ben was now old enough to keep out of trouble fairly well. At last, I thought, I can relax. Before us lies a peaceful and uneventful old age. I must be getting old, I thought sleepily, as Ben's voice boomed and meandered on, describing his brilliant triumphs in France. I can even stand these dinners. Then I slept. I was perfectly right about getting old. We were old. I found more and more pleasure in staying quietly at home, where I could enjoy the company of Sophia's children. Their father had prospered in the New World. He had established a most comfortable home for his family in a house not far from Ben's, and a delightful household it was. Many of the court customs that he had brought from France, especially their fondness for dancing all night, were considered somewhat frivolous by the more staid Philadelphia mice. But their gaiety and lively ways made them most popular among the younger set. The older people, in turn, soon succumbed to the wit and the charm of Sophia and her husband. Before long, their home became one of the most brilliant in the city. My own brothers and sisters had also progressed in the world. Most of the older ones had married and were raising families of their own. Several of them lived in our immediate neighborhood, successful, solid tradesmen. The arrival of these sprightly foreigners brought a new joy and lightness into their rather dull lives, and they became among the most regular attendants at Sophia's social gatherings. The 3 youngest, Xenophon, Isabel, and Zenas, who were about the age of Sophia's 3 oldest, were especially charmed with the newcomers and were always to be seen in their company. It was one of the happiest moments of my life when, at a brilliant triple wedding ceremony, these 6 young hearts became as 3. Chapter 15, Happy Birthday. It is not surprising that I preferred to stay at home, surrounded by these lively young ones, rather than to accompany Ben to his innumerable dinners and committee meetings. Now that the war was over, these were very dull and unimportant affairs anyway, at which Ben seldom needed my advice. I slept through all of them and suspect that Ben usually did too. However, I hesitated to mention my boredom, lest I hurt his feelings. The approach of his 81st birthday promised a solution of the difficulty. I had noticed for some time that he was becoming slightly ashamed of the old fur cap, which really was pretty shabby. A few days before his birthday, I purchased the finest beaver hat to be found in the whole city of Philadelphia. It was a splendid affair, pale gray, turned out in the latest French fashion and just Ben's size. It cost me a pretty penny too. In fact, I had to call on my brothers Claude, Daniel, and Ephraim for some financial aid, which they gladly supplied. I told my family and Sophia's of my plans for Ben's birthday. They were overjoyed at an opportunity to show their gratitude to one who had done so much for us all, and plunged into their preparations with the greatest enthusiasm. On the eve of Ben's birthday, we gathered behind the books in his study. There was quite a crowd. All my brothers and sisters from Bathsheba to Zenas, with their husbands, wives, and children were there, as well as Sophia, her husband, and all of their children. My mother and father were also present, both now quite gray, but hale and hearty as ever. All were twittering with excitement, and every last one bore a present of some sort for Ben. Prompt on the stroke of midnight, as he nodded over his writing, we swarmed forth, the children's gay voices upraised in the chorus of "Happy Birthday to You." Ben, at first overwhelmed by surprise and pleasure, soon recovered, joining in the spirit of the occasion with the greatest gusto. The gifts were first presented. My mother's was a beautifully knitted earmuff. There had been time to finish only one, she explained, but the mate would be completed before cold weather set in. My father's offering was a watch charm, most skillfully gnawed from the shell of a black walnut. Sophia's was an exquisite piece of fancy work, while her husband's was a thimbleful of rare brandy, brought with him in his flight from France. This Ben gaily tossed off with a hearty toast to us all. While the rest made their presentations, I, with 12 or 13 of my strongest brothers, slipped quietly from the room. Just as the last grandchild finished her little speech and curtsy, we staggered in with the hat. Ben's joy knew no bounds. The gifts and honors that had been heaped upon him by the great people of foreign lands seemed as nothing in his eyes to the beauties of this hat. He tried it on before the mirror, and it fit perfectly. It really didn't look bad on him either. He insisted on wearing it all the rest of the evening, and was much amused when the younger children used its broad brim for a racetrack. Crackers, cheese, and ale appeared for the older folks, and barley sugar for the young ones. Then there was more singing and dancing. Sophia's eyes sparkled as she went through the graceful figures of the minuet. I even essayed a few steps myself with fair success. My brother Daniel's oldest girl, who was rather talented that way, recited several poems. The climax of the entertainment came when Sophia and her husband sang, as a duet, one of Ben's poems. She had set it to music, which she had written especially for this occasion. Ben was greatly touched and made them repeat it several times. I did enjoy the music. After the happy throng had departed, I could see that Ben looked a little worried. "Amos," he said finally, "this hat, this magnificent hat, it seems to contain no place for you. What can I do without you?" Ben, I said, patting his shoulder, you can see the responsibilities I have now. All these young minds needing my guidance and instruction. You know that I'll always be here in the old fur cap, hanging on the bedpost, if you really need me. But you're 81 years old today, Ben. I think you're old enough to get around by yourself. As usual, Amos, he said, you're right. Tomorrow I will step out and show this old town what a real hat looks like. All right, I said, as I curled up in the old fur cap, now all my own. But do watch out for the mud holes. Here, the manuscript ends. It is done. Let me show you a quick picture of the hat.